So you've heard about all the downfalls of shameful and shameless. So I don't know that we can ever not have shame issues. And in fact, I would argue that as a Christian, we should have appropriate shame, but it's healthy shame. And I feel like this picture is a good way to illustrate that, because the child has healthy shame in relying on the father, right? It's just like, I can't walk anymore, all right? And it's like, okay, you're tired. That's okay. I'll help you out, okay? So let me give you this definition of healthy shame. Healthy shame is an emotion that teaches us about our limits. It has the power to stop us from harshly judging ourselves and others, and it draws us together to the cross of Christ. Okay, so let's look at that for a little bit. Healthy shame teaches us about our limits. It's not toxic to know that you're exhausted. It's not toxic to know that you actually can't do this, right? And that you need to ask for help. But we have these toxic shaming voices that says, keep plowing away even though you're exhausted, even though you feel like it's going to kill you. Keep staring at your computer screen even though you don't know how to use this software program. Don't walk to the next carol and ask for help, because you're supposed to know how to do everything. You're supposed to be omnicompetent, right? So there's this thing about having limits that is built into the Christian gospel, is that we have original sin. We are not holy creatures apart from Christ. It's only His holiness, right, that does that. And so by having healthy shame, it stops us from attacking ourselves, okay? So we have this judging voice that nobody else hears, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But it also, hopefully, should also result in us not harshly judging other people. And so healthy shame has the power to actually bring us to the foot of the cross together. It's to say, even if I've never done what you've done, and you've never done what I've done, it's like, in God's eyes, we're the same. This is basic stuff. Right? In God's eyes, we're the same, so I'll meet you at the foot of the cross. Because even though you think that I'm not desperate for Jesus and His absolute unconditional love and grace and mercy, I am. And maybe my issue, my sin is hypocrisy. My sin is hubris. Your sin is heroin. But you know what? They're both life-sucking. And they both take us away from Jesus. Okay? So healthy shame is really positive. I like what Bradshaw says. I define a good person as somebody who is fully conscious of their own limitations. They know their strengths, but they also know their shadow. They know their weaknesses. In other words, they understand that there is no good without bad. Good and evil are really one, but we have broken them up in our consciousness. We polarize them. So that's that whole sense of integration, that none of us is 100% good, and none of us is 100% bad. And the shaming voice, the shameful voice would say, I'm 100% what? Bad, okay? And the shameless voice says, I'm 100% good. See what I'm saying? So healthy shame says, who am I trying to kid? Certainly not God. Maybe I can pull the wool over my eyes or somebody else's eyes, but even if I'm doing the right thing, maybe my motives really suck. Right? So it's okay, just keep doing the right thing, even though it's just like, no, so let me just look in the mirror and stare at what I really see. And for, my first glance is I see what I want to see, and then after all, if I just stay in front of the mirror, I'm like, wow, look at that. I didn't see that imperfection and that imperfection. And it's just like, you know what? That's just the truth. And everybody has that truth. So it's an embracing of all of who we are, the limits and the gifts. Does that make sense? Right? So I think this is really important to understand that this is where it comes from. All right, so I want Ryan to talk a little bit more about this, because this is, as we were going back and forth both in person and on I guess it was text messages. I always imagine you lying in your bed with your BlackBerry like typing to me. But as I was throwing this out to Ryan, he was saying, so if as I've been thinking about this, if I understand what you're saying correctly, the shameful person, even though that's the place of greater crippling and weakness, the more obvious way, they seem to have the most potential to actually find strength in God versus the shameless person. All right? Does that make sense? Why? Because the shameful person, when you're convinced that you have no worth, you're much closer to coming to Jesus if you can turn that around and go, well, Jesus knows that about you and loves you just the same. Versus if you're convinced that you're full of worth, then why do you need someone, the Son of God, to die for you? You're much farther from that. So I told Ryan, so let's go back over a little bit what he was then thinking about the shameful mindset of each of the 4 totems, because it's when you're in that mindset, we're not that far from actually running to the arms of Christ. Okay, so go ahead.
So what does it mean to be growing as a Christian? That, to me, that would mean that you have to change in some sort of way. And if you feel that you're shameless, you're stagnant. You may feel powerful, and you may be at any given time, you may feel more powerful and actually be powerful than a shameful person, but you cannot grow anymore. You hit the wall. But when you're shameful, you're open to change. And that's part of why it's good to know what your personality type is. Not so that you'll change your type. We never want to necessarily change who you are, but you want to grow who you are and be as an effective dolphin as possible. And Ken pointed that out clearly about him understanding what it is for him to be shameful was when he realized, the world does not revolve around me. I love the spotlight, but that doesn't serve me in any sort of way. But when he's able to see that, he's able to speak on how to become a better person regarding that. And if he did not see it, if he did not see that he was a glutton for glory, then maybe he wouldn't be as effective in talking about that issue.
Yeah, so even this whole pursuit of the CDP, the LGBTQ thing, I mean, clearly in my voice, in my dolphin head, before I started on this journey, it's like, I'm not qualified. I don't know enough gay people. I haven't, necessarily read all the books like an owl would, but I had this dream from God, and I feel like I'm supposed to do this. But there were so many times when the voice in my head the shaming voice was saying, you're not qualified, right? Don't do this. And what if you fail in the process? And the healthy shame is to hear this from God say, well, your vision is still worth pursuing even if you fail in the process, right? So if it's worthwhile, it's even worth doing poorly. Okay, now that's something no Asian parent would ever say to their kids. Like, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Okay? But if you think about it, I talk to new parents, and one of the most scary things about new parenting is, like, I've never been a parent before. What if I screw up? Like, what if my kid is going to be so messed up because I'm going to pass on to them what my parents passed on to me that wasn't necessarily good? And so I'm going to read all these books, and I'm not, or I won't even get a kid until I know. In fact, that's the conversation that Snoopy and I had. When we were talking about whether we're going to start a family, and she says, well, before we start, can you promise me you're going to be a perfect father? Okay, yeah. And I go, wow, can I have a lawyer present? It's like, I'll tell you right now, I have the intention of being the best father I can be, but you're setting me up to fail if you want a perfect father. And, we'll just put a little money in a coffee can every week for our child's therapy later on. For where, in spite of my best efforts, well, we call it our 529 plan. It's actually for her college education. But it's this whole thing where anything worth doing, it's worth being a parent. But even if you can't do it perfectly, you should still do it, because the lessons that God will teach you along the way, right, are worth learning. That's what I'm saying. So anyway, what you see in green is the healthy shame response to what you see in the shaming voice. Okay?
And so, me being shameful as an owl, I feel like I don't know enough. And so if there was one thing that I felt hindered me most about public speaking is not having the answer to every question someone may have. So I compensate by studying every question someone may have. And I realized that, man, when I speak, I hardly cover very little about what I know. And it's great that I threw myself into fire and started speaking, even though I didn't feel completely comfortable. And so as an owl, if there's some goal that you may have, stop studying and figure out how you can do things and put yourself out there to make mistakes. I don't want to go super long on these. In terms of being a shameful guardian, beaver, well, you're laughing because you're a guardian. Oh, great! I'll have you speak. So, what was that laugh? You're laughing. What were you thinking when you're laughing?
Not working hard enough.
Do you feel like you always try to work harder and harder and harder? You feel like, okay, so you feel like you work. Do you feel like you work too hard?
I don't know.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. She feels like she needs to work hard, but she feels like she's not working too hard, which means naturally she wants to work harder. What comes up for you in regards to that?
Being a perfectionist.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
So would you want to take on a goal that's amazing, that requires any sort of stretching, if you feel like you're working too hard? It's hard. It's hard. It's extremely difficult to want to grow as a person, to do different things, if you're overwhelmed with all the responsibilities you have in your life. So inevitably, when you're anyone, actually, any totem, and you want to accomplish a goal, if it's amazing, usually it requires other people's input and help. So beavers, that means that you can't do everything yourself. You have to entrust some power to other people. You have to be able to delegate work to other people. Jonathan's like, oh yes, I need to delegate. Delegate too much. My problem is not that I'm not doing enough work. My problem is I'm doing too much work. And what can come out of that? You could become more fox-like. If you stopped being so industrious, you could understand why it's okay and positive to be flexible in certain situations. I know one of the most famous forefathers in American history was a beaver, George Washington, ISTJ, just like Jonathan. And he was a general, and after the war, naturally, we're gonna have George Washington become the president. He's like, oh man, I don't want to deal with this responsibility. This is too much work. And actually, it probably was too much work, but that's what he felt like. I don't want to do it. And he wanted to give it up in this first turn. What am I doing? But see, what was especially difficult for George Washington is the fact that he did not have any structure in place. Extremely stressful environment for Beaver to say, this is how we should be because, oh wait, we didn't do it this way in the past because we had no past, so like, what are we supposed to do in the future? So anytime Ken wants to change it up, I could imagine Jonathan's like, so what do we do in the past? There's no sort of outline to do in this past. So that's why it was so difficult for George Washington, because he, in my opinion, in order to become the president, he had to become more fox-like, to be more flexible, to not stick with a certain sort of ideal of what he thought our government structure should be, and to incorporate other ideas that's differing than his own.
Say something about the green part.
Just because you're working hard and exhausted doesn't mean you're always doing what's needed. Oh, right. Busy like a beaver. Is busy being good? Is busy good?
Sometimes.
It can be.
Yeah, I question that too. I'm not exactly sure. I know for a fact productive is good. I will always want to be efficient. But busy is good and bad, right? Because we all know why it's good, because you're industrious. But it's bad because are you doing what you're worth? I remember one of my first jobs was a very beaverish job, and I really didn't like it. I was at UCI, and I was in the library. I liked being in the library. Oh, why don't I work at the library? Studying at the library is a lot different than working at the library, because all you do working at the library is putting books on the shelf, alphabetical order. And you do that for like 5 hours of putting things in alphabetical order. After a while, I'm like falling asleep in the middle of the stacks. You know, when you're like in the Asian American section of books that are 50 years old, and you're underground, 10 feet underground, and no one's around at you. It's like, oh, I'm so bored. I feel so not productive. And beavers probably have this feeling too at some point, but they have so much resolve, and they love the fact that they have so much resolve that they keep working through it, and they're not in tune with their feelings, but they feel like they did what they should have. The problem with that is that you may look back and say, what am I doing? Like, I have to have more meaning than what I'm doing now. Like, at some point, I believe a beaver has to trust in the fact that they have to give up some work that they have so they could work on a new project that's really new. Like, if you tell beaver to work on a new project, they might think, oh, work on a different project that's already been there. No, work on a new project that hasn't been done before. That's what you can have your attention focused on. Shameful, fox, artisan, I'm not telling to no one can be, and their idea is that no one can be super talented in everything. Example of this, Michael Jordan. I love his story. Do you know what one of Michael Jordan's biggest setback was? One of his biggest setbacks? It was in high school. I believe it was a sophomore year in high school, at Laney High School. He tried out for the team, and he failed. That was a blow for him because he always wanted to be in the National Basketball Association. He thought he was talented enough, and so by not even being able to be on the varsity team, it told them, you're not good enough, you shouldn't be in basketball anymore. It's not in a fox's natural programming to think, oh, I didn't get on the basketball team, I need to work harder and develop my skills so that I can be. That's them being shameful to say, oh, I don't want to try this. I don't want to try that. I'm scared of this. I mean, I shouldn't say scared. Scared, there's probably more beaver. But they feel like it's worthless to even try because they know that they believe, I should say, that they're not talented enough to accomplish their goals. Of course, for Michael Jordan, it didn't hurt that he grew 6 inches in high school to 6'6". But really, it's not the height that made him as great as he was. It's because he worked harder than anyone. And so if you're a fox, you may feel that this is not meant for you. Like, they struggle with their journey because they say, well, what am I good at? I could do this, but I'm not that great because I know someone's better. They'll compare this on. I'm not them, so definitely I'm not as talented as them. Well, talent is only the starting point. Foxes, you have to hone that skill through trial and error. Foxes are the least likely to learn by reading a book. They learn by trial and error. They learn by making mistakes. And not necessarily big mistakes. They don't have to make big mistakes, but they make mistakes, and that's how they learn. So you really have to throw yourself out there into the fire more than any other type, because that's the only way you're really going to learn.
All right, so we came up with this diagram because I think it's helpful to understand the interplay between toxic shame and healthy shame. So as we've just said, there are two forms of toxic shame. There's the shameless, which is the Pharisee brand, and then there's the shameful, right? Both are toxic. The shameless can actually convert rather quickly to the shameful. Just in share my own story about being around people who are shameful and realizing that I thought I was better than them. So you don't have to actually go to another side of the planet, right? You can actually just go to a different attitude. And when you get to the shameful, this is where toxic shame that is shamefulness, where I'm so aware of my desperate need for something that I don't have, that in it itself converts it to healthy shame. When it creates a need for something outside of ourselves, and then as a Christian we say, well, that actually it brings us to Christ. Notice that there is no arrow that goes from shameless to Jesus. Okay? Notice that in the Gospels, they were the ones calling to crucify Jesus because they couldn't stand that he was trying to awake within them the conversion from shamelessness to shamefulness. Notice that in the Gospels, the people who did come to Jesus unashamedly were the shameful people, right? Every single person that came to Jesus. Now, the one Pharisee that we have record of that was kind of hinting at this was Nicodemus, right? But what did he do? Did he come in broad daylight? No, he came under cover of darkness because he didn't want anyone to see him going to talk to this guy. Because how terrible to admit that you might have a need outside of yourself. Okay, so I think there is something to this, that it's not the end of the world to be in the shameful state, because it can lead into, that's why I need Jesus. Okay, not that's why I need to run away from Jesus, but I am the prime candidate to actually come to Jesus. This is why he came. It's healthy to admit a need for Jesus, and then Jesus actually brings us to that place. I'll just say this real quickly. So we're saying that the audacious outcome for dolphins and owls, for us intuitives, is to embrace that there's this lack that we have that our synergistic partner has, and that to try to grow that part in ourselves, that Ryan covered very well. But at the same time is to admit our limitation, that even as I grow in that shadow area, that I need partners who are my intuitive partners to surround me and work with me. Okay? Again, I think this class is so much better because it's not just Ryan teaching it, and it's not just me teaching it. It's both of us teaching it. Okay? And yet at the same time, I'm sure it's frustrating for both of us. But it's like, in the end, we see the synergy. We see that the outcome is greater than the individual parts. In the same way, the audacious outcome for sensors, those of you who are beavers and foxes, is like, okay, yes, try to pick up some of what your sensor shadow self has, so that you can kind of strengthen yourself. But at the same time, no matter how strong you get in that shadow self, it's never going to be the same as if you actually have a partner who lives there. Does that make sense? Okay. So in Mark 10, there's a famous story of the rich young ruler, and I just want to kind of show you again that this stuff is in Scripture, if you have the lenses to see it. As Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him and fell on his knees before him. "Good teacher," he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus answered. "No one's good except God alone." Now, I think that's ironic, because I think this guy thought he was good. Okay, all right? So Jesus knows who he's talking to. "You know the commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. You shall not defraud. Honor your father and mother." And you can imagine, as this very observant Jewish wealthy person was hearing Jesus list off these specific commandments, yeah, he was like, yeah, it's just like, I am awesome, right? Because I follow all these commandments. And I think Jesus purposely said the ones that he knew this guy followed, right? Because it's obvious. I don't cheat. I don't lie. I honor my father and mother, right? Awesome. "Teacher," he declared, "not just right now. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been so careful to make sure that I live these commandments." Okay? Then Jesus looked at him and loved him. Now, this is This is the resource. This is Jesus saying, I see right through your hypocrisy, and I love you. Right? I'm the available fount of strength and power of transformation for you to become all that I know that I created you to be. But there's this potential that's not going to be realized unless you respond to it. Okay? One thing you lack. Go sell everything you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. So Jesus went to the one thing, the one commandment that he knew this particular follower actually really struggled with, but he was blind to. So here he is taking credit, like, I'm the best example. I don't know. And it's just like, look, if you want to live by the law, then you're going to be judged by the entire law. And if you just fail at one of these things, you don't get a 99%, you get an F. Okay? There is no curve here. Okay? So at this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. This guy, when hearing the opportunity to convert his shamelessness to shamefulness, right? So when his face fell, I think that was he was teetering on the like, oh, I don't do all the commandments. Oh my gosh. I'm not righteous the way God expects us to be righteous. So now he's converting to shamefulness. He has this whole, it just like, it could tip right over into the arms of Jesus, but he walks away. Okay? And that's what we're talking about here is we walk away because we don't want to face the truth that Jesus knows about us. And that is not just a great irony, it's an utter tragedy that we gather in the name of this Jesus and this gospel that promises, though your sins are as scarlet, I'll make them white as snow. Like I take you the way you are. You're the earthen vessel with all the cracks. It's the treasure that is what's going to be poured inside of you. All of that is what we believe. And yet, in spite of the fact that some of us come to church very religiously and we have our quiet times and we do all these things, it's like we're still far from actually the arms of Jesus, because at some point we're still thinking that I'm adding to my worth because I'm following all these commandments. Okay? So we walk away, and that to me is symbolic of everything we've talked about this morning. Is even though there's this audacious outcome of being fully alive in Christ, that's the audacious outcome, we turn away from that because it requires us to be more honest than we're comfortable being. All right, so we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to start watching this powerful video on listening to shame, and we're going to unpack that for you and show you how this all comes together. All right, so go ahead and take a break. Thanks for being engaged as long as you have.